If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what are the creepiest urban legends from your area? The Slap Ghost. In a village close by, there is the story that in a specific road through the woods several guys were being slapped when they pass in a bicycle in the late 70s. Always at night, one of these guys was my grandfather. He was alone and was slapped and fell off his bicycle. No one was there. Several people came home full of bruises and scratches from the bicycle fall after the slap in the face. Suddenly the slap stopped for a few years. And in the 80s the ghost came back. One young guy was slapped in the face in same place. Funny is that the mystery was solved in that day. It was a FKN branch from a tree. The old guys from the 70s came home late from the old bar, completely drunk including my grandfather, and without any source of light they would get hit by the branch and fall. Then the tree was trimmed and the slap stopped until it grew again and made this 80s guy the next victim. Lucky him, he was sober and realized what hit him. There used to be an insane asylum by my house in the 70s. It is probably 5 minutes away from my house if that. But, they tore it down in the 90s because it was just a giant eyesore, and had a dark history of mistreating patients. There is a cemetery on the property with hundreds of unnamed people who died there. In the early 2000s, Walmart bought the land and wanted to build a Walmart there since you would be able to see it from the highway. They excavated and such, and the day before they were set to start construction a huge landslide happened in the middle of the night that blocked the highway for days. If it would have happened at rush hour, tons of people would have died. Ultimately, it was deemed unsafe territory to build on, so it remains empty. Except for all the bike trails through the area. But no one ever rides during nighttime lol. I guess the people who died there didn't want to be chilling underneath the Walmart's all-10. When I was in high school we were goofing around in a small park full of trees near the cemetery late at night, and we made up a story to scare ourselves, about the tree man who would jump out from behind trees and grab you. We all had torches and were trying to keep all the trees lit so the tree man couldn't hide behind any of them, fully aware we just made the story up 5 minutes ago, but it was dark and spooky so we still managed to give each other the willies and laugh about it at the same time. We loosely tied our story to a triple murder that happened in the 1800s, the monument for which was visible from the park, for extra spookums. Every now and again for the rest of the year someone would jump out from behind a tree or grab someone and yell "Tree Man." It was just one of those stupid in-jokes teens have, and decades before Slenderman was a thing, it was the early 90s. Imagine my surprise when years later I heard the kids in lower grades telling each other quite seriously about the tree man who haunts this one park near the cemetery lol. It is a university urban legend here in the Philippines. There was a female college student that went to the female's restroom. In the cubicle, she can hear a female voice. The voice is saying some Latin, I can't remember the exact words. Obviously the female student was frightened and hurried to go back to the classroom. She then asked her professor what was the meaning of the word she heard from the restroom. The professor said it means look up, look up. I've heard another urban legend from the Philippines about a girl asking her roommate to walk with her to the bathroom. There was no electricity so they used a candle to see and used a buddy system. The roommate was dancing and laughing down the hall and the girl just giggled along. They went back to bed after using the bathroom. The girl woke up a couple hours later to a bunch of grown men around her roommate's bed and she had died, I think it was suicide, overnight. Once timing got figured out, the girl realized the roommate was dead when they went to the bathroom together. Not really creepy, but there's one house in my hometown that is said to be haunted. There's a tray with a golden teapot on it, and the tray has scratch marks on it. That tray has been sitting in the same location for years, remaining completely untouched, and still, to this day no one has touched it. Some of my friends insist that it's haunted. There's also an urban legend about how an electrician, or someone with a similar job, fell off of a ladder while setting up one of the lights in the middle school gym. His ghost is said to haunt the gym at night whenever the lights are turned off. We had one called Joey the Clown. Nearby is a disused Victorian railway which has been transformed into a 20-ish mile path for people to walk, jog, cycle etc. and links different parts of the city, just as the rail line would have. Before that it was just disused and didn't have tarmac or anything. Just mud, grass, and there were no gates in the side doors of the tunnels. The tunnels are really dark in there and we used to hang around in there when we were kids. We became aware of the urban legend of Joey the Clown, who was a lunatic who ran away from the circus, kidnapped a baby and hanged it by its feet upside down from one of the pipes above the tunnel right into the path of an oncoming locomotive which he also jumped in front of. Rumors still persist that people have seen Joey's ghost in the tunnels, and if you were brave enough to go in the tunnel at night you would hear him laugh, hear a baby cry and the sound of the locomotive. My mother uses this to her advantage when I was a kid though, by telling my sisters and I that Joey the clown preys upon children who wear odd socks and who refuse to wear clean underwear. So of course we'd all be wearing matching socks and make sure we had pristine underwear on when we ventured down to the old railway. Black Shucks, big, black, ghostly/demonic dogs with glowing red eyes that are supposed to be omens of death. They generally appear on roads at night. There's apparently a few around town and some drag chains too. Also, one is actually a bear, but I have no idea why we have a ghostly demonic bear because we don't even have normal bears in this country. There was this colonel who founded the town a couple hours south of my hometown in the 1700s. He had an affair with a young woman, and when she got pregnant he kicked her out of town and she raised their son alone for several years. When she came back and begged him for help raising their kid, he publicly declared her a witch and had her burned to death. After she was burned and they were taking her body away, her son tried to take her body from them so she could be buried on his property. He tried to pull her corpse from them by the leg, but it snapped off due to how scorched her body was. He took the leg and said it would be buried near his home. Before he left, however, he told the colonel, his biological father, that he hoped the colonel's memory would always be tainted by what he did to his former mistress. After the colonel died, a tomb was erected for him, but overnight a leg-shaped stain appeared right of the face of it. People tried to remove the stain, but it wouldn't go away. Eventually, they just replaced the stone on the tomb entirely. Only for a new, identical stain to appear in the exact same spot on the new stone. The stain is still there to this day, and it's a big tourist attraction in the area. I grew up in southern Utah near the Four Corners. In other words, Skinwalker country. I have lots of creepy stories about them, both from my own experiences and the experiences of others, but chances are a lot of you guys wouldn't believe and they probably belong to a different subreddit. However, the creepiest thing about them is that everyone, and I mean everyone, is scared of them. Most of the people in my town are farmers and overall pretty pragmatic people who aren't quick to believe or make up ghost stories. And yet, whenever I would ask an adult what are skinwalkers growing up, the answer I always got was a very serious "we don't talk about skinwalkers." Whether you believe in them or not, you have to admit that the ubiquity of that attitude in my hometown is pretty weird. My high school had a few. It was a convent/Catholic boarding school before becoming a high school. On my first day of school, my grade was brought on tours of the school by older students. Here are some of the stories I remember. When you enter the school from its main entrance to access the reception desk, you need to pass a statue of the Virgin Mary. Behind the statue there is a rope. It was said that one of the nuns committed suicide with that exact rope. Outside the front of the school there is a well and fountain that was no longer in use. The well was barred up and it was impossible to see what was down there. It was said that there was a girl who fell down the well and the nuns had no way of getting her out. Since she died, the well had been sealed shut. The teachers' offices, which students were prohibited from entering unless given permission, were on the top floor of the school. It was said that you could see/hear ghosts of nuns who used to live there. That space used to be where the nuns slept. At a site in the woods where a people were supposedly lynched, there is an indention beneath the hanging tree where the people's feet would lightly drag while hanging. People claim that if you fill the hole in and wait overnight, they say that the swinging feet of those lynched will visibly re-drag marks in the sand. There's an abandoned mental asylum near where I used to live. People would of course say it is haunted and dare one another to go there at night. But the weird thing is, it draws people in. If you find yourself driving late at night, you might end up driving on the grounds of the asylum out of nowhere. This happened to me and my mom once. Somehow we got off at the wrong exit, several exits from our normal exit, and wound up on the grounds of the asylum. Shouldn't even be possible. There are gates that are supposed to be closed and locked. I remember my mom and I were freaked out, and for a second I thought I saw faces looking out from the windows of the asylum, lights flickering on and off. We managed to find our way out through the main gate again shortly after. There's an enormous wooden railroad trestle not too far from me. Tracks are still in use, and the legend goes that one day in the 1940s when the area was super rural, a teenage boy decided to kill himself. As the road passing under the trestle was the only way to access the houses beyond it at that time, he elected to hang himself from the beam directly above the road so his parents would be forced to see him when they returned home. I normally don't believe in this sort of thing, but if you look closely you can still see marks in the timber above the road that look suspicious, like a rope rubbed against it. In a neighboring town, there lies a tree known as the Devil's Tree. It has no leaves, and never grows leaves. It has been dead for years and still hasn't fallen. It was the site of many lynchings back in the day and is said to be connected to a gateway to hell itself. Snow melts around the tree, and people have tried taking the tree down before to no avail. It is said that anyone who disrespects the tree in any way meets a gruesome fate. One such instance was of an 18-year-old football player who was out with his buddies when he thought it would be funny to piss on the tree. As they left, he floored it down the road, and his headlights went out, causing him to crash and he lost his life. I'd give out the stories of the tree, but I've seen it, it's real. Snow doesn't go around it and it stands to this day, dead as dead could be. It is the only tree in a large open field, and many question why it hasn't been taken down. Only to be reminded of why. Not in my area, it has been on the news about many years ago. Many Malaysians will know about this. There's a couple driving when suddenly their car broke down in Karak Highway, Genting Highlands at like 3 a.m. The husband came down to find someone to help and the wife waits in the car. The wife waited for so long but decided to keep waiting. She saw some cars pass by slowly and then sped up. After hours of waiting, the police had came and they used the loudspeaker to told the woman to came out of the car without looking back. After that, she turned her head and saw a banshee-looking creature sucking her husband's head. There's many ghosts in Genting Highland mainly because there's many people commit suicide there and it has many accidents at Karak Highway. And there's many urban legends around Malaysia and the famous one is Orang Minyak which is called Oily Man in English. There are many creatures at night wandering around in a place where it is very few or no people. I live in the Vic Alpine area, Australia. Being all cool and mountainous, we have plenty of people heading up into the mountains to camp. Anyways, there have been rumors about this guy known as the Button Man. Pretty much people are waking up to find pictures of this man lying next to them in their tent taken with their own phone. I wouldn't usually believe rumors like this, considering it could be easily faked. But once I was out on an overnight hike with two friends. It was relatively late and me and one friend clearly hear human footsteps outside the tent. I call out my other friend's name who was sleeping alone in another tent. We hear the footsteps sprint away from our campsite, so I get up and scan the area with my torch, finding nothing. We then go to check on my friend, who we find sleeping. Scared out of our minds, we stay up the rest of the night just in case, but we don't hear anything else. We didn't find any new images on our phones in the morning, and there was no evidence that somebody had been to our campsite. But the footsteps sounded so human so it's hard to say it was an animal. Other than that we have had two campers, unrelated to me or each other, gone missing in the night on separate occasions. With their dead bodies found later out in the snow gum forests. Most likely dead from hypothermia, but it's hard to say whether it was like to the Button Man. There's a place in my county like 10 to 15 minutes from my house called Bostic Brickyard. Legend goes that it was a slave owner's property and that he killed all of his slaves and dumped them in the swamp there. If you go out to the swamp at night and yell throw something, you hear something being thrown into the water. If you keep yelling, you can hear it get closer. I'm getting chills because I've personally experienced it a few times and it's creepy as duck. One time, I and a group of like 5 made the mistake of using a Ouija board there and we heard a distant scream. Ducking terrifying. There's also a legend in the same place that a green banshee will chase you out of there, but nothing's happened to me, yet. Another one is this little church/girls' school that sits not too far off from the gates of Hell Cemetery I mentioned in my other comment. There are a few different rumors about it. The one I was always told was that a nun hanged herself in the open bell tower, and that on certain nights you can see her body swinging still. I've also heard that a nun went crazy and killed some of her students before being stopped. My mother was a wild thing, and her friends actually climbed up and touched the bell as a teenager lol. They've actually renovated the interior a few times, once a restaurant and a bed and breakfast, but even after the people there said weird shit would happen, like chairs sliding across the floor, and shadowy figures in the bell tower. The tale of the big black dog circulates around our area. I grew up in a rural area without a terrible amount of legends. When I was young, a teen near our house died in a car accident. Not an uncommon accident for a young teen. She crashed into a tree. But some said that she did so trying to avoid a dog. A big black dog with an unusually long tail according to some descriptions. It was said by some in the area that an old man in the area mistreated a dog, and the dog in question haunted the area seeking revenge. It was said that seeing the dog predicted either death or great fortune. My brother used to tell me stories about the big black dog. I pretty much ignored the stories until I encountered the dog for myself. When I was in high school I had a friend who I took with me pretty much everywhere. When we explored the woods about my house we always took my family dogs. It was a rural area where we regularly let dogs off leash and just expected them to follow us and not stray too far. If they ever encountered anything unusual, they would absolutely alert and raise hell. Well, one time we were just making our way to the creek and I heard a rustle in the fall leaves. I watched a huge black dog with a stupidly long tail cross our road, crash through the leaves, and disappear into the woods. None of my dogs reacted to it in the slightest. I know if I saw/heard that dog move over the road, the dogs would have, yet they didn't acknowledge it in the slightest. And my dogs were stupidly territorial. They would have chased a dog/rat/rabbit/whatever to the end of the earth. I thought I was hallucinating. Until my friend asked me if I just saw that enormous black dog cross our path and asked me why none of my dogs reacted to it. It was so surreal. I thought I was being paranoid, and then my friend asked me why none of my dogs reacted to the strange black dog and if I even saw it. It was strangely even weirder having a close friend acknowledge the oddities. The only other time I have walked that way since, coyotes started whooping and we turned right the duck around. I'm not interested in being around that area of my parents' house ever again. There's a house back home that is supposedly haunted by the devil and a woman. It was turned into an actual haunted house you could visit on 2010, but prior to this it was gated off for years and was supremely creepy to look at. Taken from the Wikipedia entry on Loftus Hall, Charles Tottenham became Lord of the Manor, having to adopt the Loftus name to inherit lands and title as per instructions of Nicholas Loftus 1752, by marrying the Honourable and Loftus daughter of the first Viscount Loftus, and they had 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, Elizabeth and Anne. However, his wife became ill and died while the girls were still young. 2 years later, Tottenham married his cousin Jane Cliff, and they lived together, along with Anne, in Loftus Hall. 5. One evening Charles was resting in his home in 1775 with his second wife and daughter from his first marriage, Anne, while the Loftus family were away on business. During a storm, a ship unexpectedly arrived at the Hook Peninsula, where the mansion was located. A young man was welcomed into the mansion. Anne and the young man became very close. One night, the family and mysterious man were in the game room playing cards. In the game, each player received 3 cards apart from Anne, who was only dealt 2 by the mystery man. A butler serving the Tottenham family at the table was just about to question the man when Anne bent down to pick another card from the floor which she must have dropped. It is said that when Anne bent over to pick up the card, she looked beneath the table to see that the mysterious man had a cloven foot. It was then that Anne stood up and said to the man, "You have a cloven foot," and the man went up through the roof, leaving behind a large hole in the ceiling. Soon Anne became mentally ill. It is believed that the family were ashamed of Anne and locked her away in her favorite room, where she would be happy, yet out of everyone's view, which was known as the Tapestry Room. She refused food and drink, and sat with her knees under her chin, looking out the Tapestry Room window across the sea to where Dunmore East is today, waiting for her mysterious stranger to return until she died in the Tapestry Room in 1775. It is said that when she died, they could not straighten her body, as her muscles had seized, and she was buried in the same sitting position in which she had died. I moved to the Caribbean St. Vincent, in 3rd grade, and I still hear I don't remember much, but there are something like a jumbie, that's how it's pronounced, not sure if it's how it's spelt. From what I've been told, it's usually described as a fully black humanoid figure that will appear in dreams or under an umbrella during a sunny day. A sokuya, I have no idea how to spell it, it's basically a vampire that travels the night as a ball of fire. There is another that I forgot the name of, but it's an owl, but when you throw a stone at it, it becomes a Rastafarian man with eyes of fire that will watch you and nothing else. I live at the border of Berlin and Treptow-Köpenick in a little area called Ronsdorf. From the train station there is a really long walkway through a forest to get to the next settlement. At day it's not that bad, going through it is actually quite nice, but people tend to rather take another way when it gets dark, especially in winter times, because there were reports of people getting brutally wounded or even killed. I once found someone who was really badly injured with cuts all over his chest. I called the police and an ambulance right after I saw that the man was still alive. After the law enforcement arrived and treated the wounded man, they started asking me the regular question like, "Did you see anything out of the ordinary? Did you see anyone who could have done this?" I couldn't answer any of the questions. I also asked what weapon could have caused such devastating wounds. The cuts were so deep that you could see parts of the ribcage. One of the officers told me that it was probably a sword or an axe. It later turned out that the cuts were done by either a claymore or a zweihände, and I was terrified of the thought that someone or something attacks people with great swords after dark. After that incident, people were speaking of the things that happened, because apparently this time it happened a lot closer to the settlement, a lot closer than anyone wanted. An investigation was set into motion, but nothing was found. People started to tell stories about why this was happening, and I caught up to what was told. Apparently it was a vengeful spirit of a Teutonic Knight who fell in a battle that took place in this forest. Dishonored and disgusted and full of rage, he swore that he will stop everyone who tried to find out what happened at that battle so no one could shame him. I thought to myself that it was just some people making up stories to scare kids, but more research tested out that some of these facts are kind of true. A small battle took place about over 900 years ago, and during the investigation of the police they found old remains of a medieval battlefield, swords, armor, etc. And people who have been attacked also told the police that the attacker wore a white robe with a black cross, the emblem of the Teutonic Knights, and they also said that he was wearing rotten clothes and rusted armor. People now tend to stay away from that path at night, and these child stories are even scaring adults too now that more and more stories are told about the vengeful Teutonic Knight who attacks those who dare to step into his battlefield. I myself keep distance from that path at night because I'm a bit paranoid when it comes to these things. Hope this is being acknowledged as a warning. If you ever visit Germany and go to Ronsdorf to see this place, only do it at daytime. It's not worth it going at night and then being cut in half by a claymore/Zweihände. The Goat Man is definitely the Appalachian folktale I came for. The kid version of this was told to us almost every night we were driving home through winding country roads in the woods and in creek valleys in Kentucky. The Goat Man started life as an old, curmudgeonly goat shepherd. He lived alone and tended to a herd of goats, obviously. He was mean and cruel to the animals, shouting at them, kicking them and hitting them with his staff to get them into the barn at night. Eventually the biggest brute goat with long, curling horns formulated a plan. Every day the goats would go out into fields and woods to graze and would come back to the barn. So they started digging a pit behind the barn, clawing into the fertile earth with their hooves. When the pit was deep enough, they started gathering poisonous mushrooms and herbs and plants and roots when they grazed, keeping them in their mouths on the return journey to spit into the pit. They gathered moss and leaves and rotten bark. They only drank fresh, clean water from the flowing creek, but gathered the stale, dark water from the ponds in their mouths to fill the pit, spitting out mouthfuls of dead water into their rotten pit every night. It began to glow with a soft and dull but green light as the still water filled the pit. Then one night, when the pit was full, the mean old shepherd was kicking and swatting at his herd to drive them back to the barn. The goats didn't go inside, but instead moved to the back of the barn, despite the kicks and yells and beatings they received. They started pushing and nudging the shepherd towards the pit. He grew angrier and angrier because they weren't going inside the barn. They grouped around him and nudged him to the edge of the pit. The biggest old goat with long curling horns bleated loudly "Bee-ya" and crashed right into the shepherd's chest, knocking him into the poisonous pit. The goats chewed the grass and the herbs around that land for many years, still coming home to sleep in the barn, but they dare not go to the back where they dug that pit. They tell their own stories of suffering and torture by a two-legged creature with furry legs, hooved feet, but a man's arms and a human head with long, curling horns that hunts them at night looking for revenge, and wanders the woods for miles, searching for those who are wandering or lost on a road or trail. The True Children's ending adds another short clip about a young couple driving on an unfamiliar, winding road at night near the hills where the Goatman once lived, the couple having heard stories about the Goatman jumping in front of slow driving cars to shout, "I'm ba-ha-ah-ha" at. Maitland Jail, claimed to be the most haunted place in Australia and the last place to do public hangings in Australia. I've been a few times and always encountered something odd. Once a heavy metal cell door slammed shut in front of our group and even the ex-con tour guide went running. One odd thing you can see for yourself when you walk into the jail, the entrance gates is where people were hung. On the double-paned glass face hole in the door leading to the stairs where you were hung you can visibly see a face inside the glass. This appeared after the last execution took place and is inside the glass. You'd need to take apart a heavy metal door to get in between those glass plates. It looks almost like it's made from soot or smoke, if anyone is familiar with drawing with soot from a burning candle. But its creepiest story is from cell 4 of C Block, where an alleged devil-worshipping prisoner conducted satanic rituals in his cell. Occult graffiti remains on the walls to this day. It is said that after forming a pact with the devil, the prisoner committed suicide by setting himself on fire. The poor guard who had the unfortunate job of cleaning up the aftermath was known to be a level-headed and happy family man. He was later found dead in a pool of blood in his bathroom at home, both wrists slashed by broken shards of the mirror he had smashed. Apparently, he left a message written in his own blood, stating he needed to kill himself to prevent the unleashing of satanic forces. Supposedly, cell 4 is kept padlocked shut to this day. In my area, we have abandoned schoolhouses and historical areas nearby that have myths about being haunted. Some may actually be true. I can definitely remember some ghost stories from the 100-year-old Catholic school I attended. Not an urban legend, but the creepiest things have occurred in my childhood home. Growing up, I can remember feeling like I was being watched. I would see dark figures a lot. There was this one time I saw glowing red eyes staring at me through a window. I was an imaginative kid, so my parents didn't believe me, but this definitely wasn't my imagination acting up. The guest room in my house was always creepy. Even guests talked about how they couldn't sleep at night when they stayed over. I think it's fine now. I've cleansed the house numerous times and now it's a peaceful room I meditate in. I think the most significant occurrences were when I was a teenager. When I was 16, I was woken up in the middle of the night to the feeling someone pushing my shoulder and a hot breath in my ear. My back was facing against the wall and no one else was in my room. When I was 18, I had a similar experience, but this time, I felt a large cold hand touch my inner thigh. Both of these happened around 3 a.m. I told my parents about these occurrences. My ghost believer of a mom surprisingly didn't believe me, but my skeptic of a father did. He told me about how a few years before I was born, my parents were sleeping and my dad was in a half-asleep trance state. He felt something crawling underneath the covers and touch him. He woke up and figured it was all a dream until a second later when my mom asked, "Did you feel that too?" Again, not an urban legend, but I just wanted to share a creepy story. I've seen an actual skinwalker with my own 2 eyeballs in West Lake Tahoe in Kissimmee, Florida. It was right after Hurricane Irma. This thing looked like as if it was a wolf covered in bare human flesh. Naked as a MF. Standing upright, mind you. I still till this day have no ducking idea what the ever-living shit this thing was. It almost looked like a centaur but no horse's ass. It was on McKinson's Island in Kissimmee. Me and 4 other friends saw this thing emerge from the palmettos and stared at us for up to 3 minutes. At least 6-5 years all. I still dream about it. Come to find out, Mackinson Island was where the Spanish settlers banished the Seminole tribe too. Gives me the ducking willies, bro. Growing up in mid-Michigan, there was supposedly an area way out in the country called Midgetville. A few people knew how to find it. It was way out in the country between a few different towns. Major backwoods/farmland. There were small houses and other small town buildings that were connected by tunnels that you could go into. Also, there was an overseer who would shoot at cars if he caught you on the property. One kid in the grade above me claimed that he shot at the tree next to him when they were running back to the car. I never got out there myself, but I had friends who swore up and down that it existed. The only evidence I ever saw was some grainy cell phone pictures. Perth, Western Australia. We have a hospital for the mentally insane called Greylands. I heard this one in the 70s and early 80s, and it's only you asking that has made me remember this. The story goes. A couple were out for a date one summer's night and had parked down the road from Greylands Hospital for a bit of a cuddle. When it came time to leave, his car wouldn't start. It was well before mobile phones and you had to walk a while to find a public telephone. The guy leaves the girl with the car and walks off to the main road to find a phone. It's quite a long walk. He finally finds a public phone and calls for help and starts the long walk back. On the way he notices police and ambulance heading in the same direction. A while later he nears the hospital and sees all the lights and is stopped by a policeman. "Don't go any further." The guy says to the policeman, "Is that your car?" To which he replies, "Yes." At that moment the RAC car arrives and his headlights light up the car and he can see a guy sat on the roof of his car with something in his lap that he is eating. "Don't look," says the cop. The next day in the newspaper it said an inmate had escaped the hospital, found the girl in the car and killed her, and was sat eating her brains on the roof of the car. We avoided that area, never left anyone alone in a car, etc. I hated that story and being in a car in the dark. I still automatically lock car doors when I get in. There are so many legends connect to the mountain mass my town is in. But I really like the one about 3 sisters. It's connected to old dance house. It used to be really fancy place for rich people to dance. There once was a rich man that had 3 daughters that he loved dearly. And when they grew into women he decided it's time for them to marry. So he decided to build them a place where a big banquet would be held and choose their husbands. But no one wanted to marry any of them. And so, the night after the banquet, they hanged themselves on the trees next to the house. And when the father found them he took his own life as well. It is said that the 3 sisters come back at midnights and search for a husband. And if a man gets close to the house at night, they will take him with them back to afterlife. It's more of a tragedy, but I think it's kinda creepy as well. Decades ago, late 30s/early 40s, on an especially dark evening, a nun was driving a school bus filled with children home after a field trip. They were heading down Shane Road, but when approaching the railroad crossing, the bus abruptly stalled out on the tracks. Most of the students were sleeping, so she was quietly attempting to start the engine back up. It was then that a train emerged, seemingly out of nowhere. As its headlamp was burnt out, it offered no warning of its impending arrival. It was too late to evacuate the children, as the train was moving too fast. The nun, desperately and frantically, turned the key, making one last attempt to restart the bus just as the train smashed through the bus, cutting it in half. The nun was thrown through the windshield but miraculously survived. The young children were not as fortunate, they were all killed instantly. A few weeks later, the nun, guilt-ridden and heartbroken, returned to the site of the accident. She was unable to continue on and thus decided to end her life. She parked her car on the tracks and sat there waiting for the next train to come along. Later, when a train came into sight, speeding down toward her, in the same way as that tragic night, the nun began to hear small familiar voices. Then, her car began to move forward, as if it was being pushed from behind. The nun's car was rolled to safety, just as the train roared by. In disbelief, the nun got out of her car, and began looking around expecting to find a good Samaritan. She saw not a single soul. She looked back at her car and noticed children-sized handprints on the back of her trunk. It was then she realized that the ghosts of her students had saved her life. The nun was then blessed with a newfound purpose in life, and she opened a school for orphans. She taught there till the day she died. It is said that to this day, if anyone parks their car on or near the railroad tracks at Shane Road, ghostly children will push the vehicle to safety, as they are determined to make sure that no one meets the same gruesome fate that they suffered. This is just outside of San Antonio, TX. Lechuzas in Mexico. My grandpa told me of a time when he was young and they lived in Mexico. He said his mom told him to go take a package of some sort to her friend who happened to live a half-day's walk through the woods away. So he took his machete and the package on his trip to this lady's house. There was many rumors saying that this lady was a witch, and my great-grandma was known to associate with witches as well. After arriving at the lady's house and dropping off the package, he turned around to head home, but halfway through his journey back in the woods it started to get dark. As he's walking, a huge owl starts flying by him and then eventually at him. It starts crashing into him over and over again. So he pulls out his machete and slashes it next time it comes over him, and he hears it fall and land on the ground, so he feels he got it and continues on his journey. Next morning his mom tells him he forgot part of the package he was supposed to take to the lady, so he has to go again. So he says fine and makes the half-day trip again. Once he arrives at the lady's house, she opens the door and is missing an arm. So he drops the package and sprints home. The creepiest one for me here in the Philippines is what we call the tic-tic. He usually preys on pregnant women and the fetus inside. They said a tic-tic has really long and strong tongue that they use to get the fetus. I don't know how they do it, but wow. And they make a tic-tic sound like from afar when they are just above the roof to trick their victims. Another one is manananggal/aswang. They appear like normal person during the day, could be your neighbor, classmate, vendor, etc. At night, they use a special oil that separates their upper and lower body. They would leave the lower body, from waist down, and their upper body would grow wings so they could fly at night while looking for a victim and eat the victim's internal organs. The Banana Man is the first that comes to mind for me, only because I might have encountered him. There's an old abandoned railroad track that runs by my parents' house. The village used to be a major coal mining area, so throughout the woods near the tracks are abandoned coal mines and random little stone buildings, as well as a small, windowless brick shack, maybe 6 or 7 square feet. The brick shack belonged to the Banana Man. Legend goes that around 50 years ago, he used to spend his days selling bananas and other foods to the railroad workers and coal miners. Until a group of young men beat him up and murdered him. They supposedly buried him under the floorboards of his shack and were never caught. As kids, we used to play along the old track and in the surrounding woods. The Banana Man's shack remained untouched my entire childhood. The door was always closed, and try as we might, we couldn't open it. The door was huge and wooden, and on 3 giant metal hinges that were too rusted to budge. It didn't seem to be locked, just too rusty. Even when we enlisted the help of my older brother's friends, 5 teens boys couldn't get it to move even an inch. I once told the story on here of a shadow man that I saw on my parents' porch when I was a kid. I'll find the link if anyone is curious. I've often wondered if that was the Banana Man. Shortly after I had that encounter with the shadow man on my porch, we were playing by the train tracks and noticed the Banana Man's door was open. Not just open, the door had been ripped off the hinges and was broken in half, laying in the back of the shack. One of the 3 giant metal hinges was bent completely in half. And the floorboards of the shack were all busted up. We have no idea who broke into the shack, or how, considering we had tried countless times to open that door. We couldn't even unbend the hinge that had been bent, so who the heck managed to bend all 3 to open the door? It was freezing cold inside though. I did not like being in there. There was nothing in there except the busted floorboards and door, and what might have been a shelf at one point but was just a pile of rotted wood against a wall. The smell was what got me though. It smelled legitimately like bananas. Like old, rotten bananas, but distinctly bananas. And another odd thing about the shack? There's zero cell service when you walk nearby it. There's a cell tower a little ways off from the shack, so everywhere else you have perfect service. But within 10 feet of that thing? Not a single bar, no matter what side of it you are on. We have 2 upper elementary schools in our town, the one currently in use, and the other one, in the middle of town, surrounded by a nice lawn and maple trees. This other building is abandoned, and has been for years. The lawn is the only thing being cared for, to just make the town look a little better. Imagine the most stereotypical school from a movie: brick building, walls worn with time, multiple stories, about 2 or 3, darkened windows, from dust and debris. I never went inside, but alumni in the years before me had, and they claimed to know why it was abandoned. They say a young girl, depressed, and stricken with constant fear, finally had enough. She went into the staff bathroom, and locked the door behind her. Nobody knew she was in there, but the staff noticed the door had been locked for quite a while. When they got the door open, they found her body, laying lifeless, on the floor. Her hair was wet, as if she had tried to drown. Her skin was pale, and lips were blue. There was blood on her fingertips and in a puddle, flowing from a wound on her head. They took her away and mourned her loss, gave her a proper burial, but according to the story, she never found the peace she sought out. People started noticing strange things happening at the school. In the morning, there would be water all over the floor. Students would suddenly get a chill for seemingly no reason. After school hours, when only teachers remained, they'd hear a dripping sound throughout the halls. They say, her spirit roams those halls to this day. Anyone who's seen her would tell you she's all white, except her jet black hair. She constantly drips water, everywhere she goes. And if she sees you, she charges right at you, and she grabs you in her cold, clammy fists. She shakes you, begging for her nightmare to end. And if you look closely, you see glimmering crimson in her hair. Her eyes are dead, white globes. When she finally lets go, or you get out of her grasp, she disappears, and it goes silent for a few moments, before the dripping begins again, in another hallway. When you look at where she grabbed you, there are bloody fingerprints. Needless to say, people tend to stay out of there. And that is why the old upper elementary school is abandoned. In my hometown in Ireland we have the story of the Green Lady, whose soul is trapped in a green bottle and sealed behind a brick wall in the house where she lived. When I was a kid, the story goes that if you were out late at night when you shouldn't be and you walked past her house, the spirit of the Green Lady would leave her bottle, find you, and kill you. Her house just happened to be beside an old cathedral too, with a graveyard, so it was scary shit. Legit nightmare fuel for a kid. I think the story behind the Green Lady is based on an old murder case in my town, when sometime in the late 1800s a young woman was convicted of infanticide after the death of a 3-year-old girl, who had been drowned in a boiler. The woman was arrested and declared insane after she tried to kill herself in prison, and it just so happened my small town is home to a very large and old women's jail too, which is where she was kept. My town is full of ghosts, and here are a few legends. There is a place called Log Hill, and it used to signal incoming boats to stay away. Well, one day, a girl with dark hair and blue eyes suddenly appeared on the hill, and every morning, joggers would often see her, standing there, mouth agape as if she was screaming, but no noise would occur. Joggers would run up, and say, "Is everything all right?" and she would just stand there. Well, one day, they actually found a woman's body laying in some bushes nearby, and the ghost never appeared again. That's until an entirely different woman appeared. Same clothing, same mornings, same everything, and she had blonde hair and brown eyes. No one has any explanation, and often we would just say, "Leave her be." There is an alleyway which we'll call Diagon Alley. A legend goes that a Chinese boy fell in love with a beautiful girl in the alleyway. She and him fled her master, and attempted to run away. 2 of the men's bodyguards came running out to chase them, and he ran through the alley. They eventually caught up, and cut the boy's head off afterward. People say that sometimes they'll see the boy running through the alleyway, and he will blow you off to the sides when he passes by, and then disappear out of thin air. Second story. Let's call this graveyard, Granger Graveyard. So, 2 legends go with the graveyard. One is the Blue Angel. A group of teenagers spray painted the poor angel, which is how it got its name. Legend says that if you ask the angel a question, it will either cry, or smirk. If it smirks, it's a yes. If it cries, it's a no. This angel is actually known to literally cry tears, and no one knows why. A tour guide told us a story about how he was showing a group of tourists a book of old photos of the deceased. One of the tourists started screaming, I saw her, and he asked what they meant. I saw that lady in the graveyard with a baby carriage, slowly walking the grounds. It was a picture of the owner of the land, and first person buried there. Mrs. Granger. My great-grandfather worked on a farm in the outback. A long time ago there was a herd which went missing, so the farmer and a sheepdog went out after them. My great-grandfather knew it was going to be a stormy night, and for whatever reason, he went out after them, leaving my great-grandmother and infant behind. When he caught up to them, it had started raining, but he could see the herd stuck on the edge of a riverbank, the sheepdog barking like mad. He whistled to the farmer, who whistled back, but part of the riverbank collapsed and half the herd went in the drink, along with the farmer and dog too. That river was rapid and nearly killed my great-grandfather that night, but the bodies of the farmer and dog were never found. The whole community heard what happened, and my great-grandfather never went near that river again, but when his son, my grandfather, was in school, people started talking about the lost dog, or the river dog. Apparently on windy, rainy nights, people swear they can hear the farmer whistling, and the dog barking in return, trying to save the herd from the storm. The river dog was still a legendary ghost story when I left the school there and moved out of state.